Jasmine Washington stands in shock, her cheek burning, baby crying in her arms. The entire first-class cabin falls silent after flight attendant Bethany slapped her. Suddenly, Jasmine's husband Terrell enters from the cockpit, revealing he's not just a passenger but CEO of Skyline Airways. Bethany's face transforms from rage to horror. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever witnessed discrimination while traveling. Let me know in the comments if you've ever been treated unfairly on a flight. This story might resonate more than you think. Dr. Jasmine Washington had perfected the art of multitasking long before becoming a mother. At 34, she was one of the youngest neurosurgeons at Baltimore Memorial Hospital, having overcome countless barriers in a field dominated by white men. Her husband, Terrell Grant, 36, had built Skyline Airways from a regional carrier into the fifth largest airline in the country through sheer determination and business acumen. Their relationship had always been a delicate balance of ambition and support. When they welcomed their daughter Zara 3 months ago, that balance became even more precarious. Both had taken reduced schedules to bond with their newborn, but the demands of their high-profile careers couldn't be ignored forever. "Are you sure about this trip?" Terrell asked as he watched Jasmine pack Zara's diaper bag in their spacious Baltimore penthouse. "Your mom could always come here instead." Jasmine carefully folded tiny onesies into neat squares. "Mom hasn't been feeling well enough to travel. Besides, I can't hide in our apartment forever. Zara and I need to get out into the world." What Jasmine didn't say was that she was anxious about traveling with Zara. Not because of normal new mom worries, but because of experiences that had nothing to do with her baby and everything to do with her skin color. Last year, before her pregnancy, Jasmine had been bumped from a first-class seat despite her confirmed reservation. The gate agent had looked at her natural hair and dark skin and assumed she was in the wrong line. It had taken 20 minutes and a manager to resolve the confusion, by which time boarding was nearly complete, and passengers stared as she finally took her seat. 3 months before that, security had pulled her aside for a random search that seemed anything but random when she noticed she was the only person of color being checked. And twice, flight attendants had questioned her seat assignment in business class, asking to see her boarding pass when they hadn't asked any white passengers the same question. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern that Jasmine recognized all too well from a lifetime of similar misunderstandings. Terrell understood. As a black man building a business in an industry with little diversity at the executive level, he'd faced his own battles. It's why he'd implemented strict anti-discrimination policies at Skyline and why he conducted regular, mystery passenger, evaluations to ensure those policies were being followed. "Actually," Terrell said, zipping up his own overnight bag, "I was thinking I might join you on the flight." Jasmine looked up in surprise. "I thought you had back-to-back meetings all day." "I rescheduled. But here's the thing, I want to fly as a regular passenger. Not as the CEO. Another one of your undercover boss moments?" Jasmine smiled. "You know, it's the only way to see how things really operate," Terrell replied. "We'll book separate seats. You won't even know I'm there. So I'll be on my own with Zara." "You'll be fine," he assured her, kissing her forehead. "And I'll be watching how our staff treats all our passengers, especially those traveling with infants." What neither of them realized was how important that decision would become. On the day of the flight, Jasmine arrived at Baltimore International Airport 2 hours early, navigating the terminal with Zara strapped to her chest and a diaper bag over her shoulder. Terrell had left separately and would be boarding last to maintain his cover. Skyline's first-class check-in was quick and efficient. The agent cooed at sleeping Zara, offered Jasmine a pre-boarding option, and directed her to the premium lounge. So far, so good. In the lounge, Jasmine settled into a quiet corner, grateful for the peaceful environment to nurse Zara before the flight. She was just finishing when she noticed an older white woman staring at her with undisguised disapproval. "Excuse me," the woman said loudly, "isn't there a family room for that sort of thing?" Jasmine adjusted her nursing cover, I'm quite comfortable here, thank you. Well, others might not be, the woman huffed, looking around for support, but finding none from the other lounge occupants. Jasmine had encountered this before, the assumption that she didn't belong in premium spaces, the notion that her presence was somehow disruptive. She took a deep breath and reminded herself of what Terrell always said, their discomfort with your success is not your problem. Boarding began smoothly. The gate agent welcomed Jasmine warmly and offered to help with her bags. As she settled into her first-class seat, 1A, by the window, she felt a momentary sense of relief. Zara was still sleeping peacefully, and they had the row to themselves so far. That peace was short-lived. As other first-class passengers boarded, Jasmine noticed the subtle double-takes, the quick glances at her and then at their boarding passes, as if confirming they were indeed in the right cabin with her. She was used to it, this silent questioning of her presence in spaces of privilege. A middle-aged white businessman took the aisle seat in her row, nodding curtly without making eye contact. As more passengers filed in, Jasmine caught snippets of conversation. Is that a baby in first? Great, just what we need on a 3-hour flight. Jasmine pretended not to hear, focusing instead on Zara, who was beginning to stir. She knew from experience that confronting such comments only made things worse, casting her as the angry black woman, a stereotype she'd spent her entire professional career avoiding. Terrell boarded last, as planned. From her window seat, Jasmine spotted him walking down the jetway, dressed in casual clothes rather than his usual tailored suit. He caught her eye briefly but gave no sign of recognition as he made his way to his seat several rows behind her. The flight attendants began their pre-departure service. A young white male attendant offered the businessman next to Jasmine a choice of water or orange juice. When he turned to Jasmine, his friendly demeanor remained intact, offering her the same options. Then Bethany Adams appeared. The senior flight attendant, with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and crisp uniform, approached to hang the businessman's jacket. When she turned to Jasmine, her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Madam, you'll need to stow that bag completely under the seat," she said, pointing to the diaper bag that was mostly, but not entirely, tucked away. "Of course," Jasmine replied, adjusting it further. "And you'll need to hold the infant securely during takeoff and landing," Bethany continued, her tone suggesting Jasmine might not know how to hold her own child. "Yes, I'm aware," Jasmine said evenly. As Bethany moved on, Jasmine caught the subtle difference in how the flight attendant addressed her compared to other passengers. No warm welcome, no "Ms. Washington," no offer of a pre-takeoff beverage like the others received. Just curt instructions. It was nothing overt, nothing she could point to definitively as discrimination. Just another tiny paper cut in a lifetime of similar wounds, small enough to be dismissed individually, but collectively painful and exhausting. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Jasmine gazed out the window, mentally preparing for the flight ahead. Zara was awake now, looking around with curious eyes. Jasmine hoped she would remain calm during takeoff, when the pressure change might hurt her tiny ears. What Jasmine couldn't know was that this flight would become far more than just another travel experience with subtle undertones of bias. In 3 hours, her life, and the culture of an entire airline, would be changed forever. Bethany Adams prided herself on running a tight ship in the first-class cabin. 15 years as a flight attendant had taught her exactly how things should be done. Today, however, she was already irritated before the flight even took off. The crew scheduling department had changed her planned Paris route to this domestic flight at the last minute due to another attendant's illness. Instead of shopping along the Champs-Élysées tomorrow, she'd be back in her small apartment in Baltimore. As she arranged the galley for drink service, Bethany's thoughts drifted to the passengers in first class. She'd already made mental notes about them: the silver-haired businessman in 1C who'd flirted with her during boarding, a probable good tipper, the elderly couple who seemed pleasant but might need extra attention, and the young black woman with the baby in 1A. That last passenger had already triggered something in Bethany, though she would never admit it was racial bias. In her mind, it was about standards. First class had standards, and in Bethany's experience, certain passengers just didn't quite fit. "Need any help with setup?" asked Thomas, the other first-class flight attendant. "I've got it," Bethany replied curtly. "Just make sure we don't have any call buttons going unanswered like on yesterday's flight." As the plane reached cruising altitude, Bethany began her carefully choreographed service routine. She moved down the aisle with practiced efficiency, addressing each passenger by name after quickly checking the manifest. "Mr. Calloway, what can I get you to drink this morning?" she asked the businessman in 1C, her voice warm and friendly. "Bloody Mary, light on the ice," he replied without looking up from his laptop. Coming right up, Bethany smiled. When she reached Jasmine, her demeanor shifted subtly. The warmth in her voice cooled several degrees. "Drink?" she asked simply, without using Jasmine's name despite it being right there on her tablet. "Apple juice, please," Jasmine replied. "And if possible, some warm water for the baby bottle." Bethany nodded stiffly. "I'll bring the juice. We'll see about the warm water once I've finished serving everyone." As Bethany moved to the next row, Jasmine noticed how the flight attendant's smile returned instantly for the white couple across the aisle, how she addressed them by name and engaged in friendly small talk about their destination. This wasn't new to Jasmine. As the only black female neurosurgeon in her department, she'd grown accustomed to these subtle differences in treatment. The nurses who responded immediately to other doctors' requests but made her wait. The patients who questioned her credentials despite the "Dr. Washington" embroidered on her white coat. The fellow physicians who talked over her in meetings or attributed her ideas to male colleagues. 15 minutes later, all the other passengers had received their drinks, but Jasmine was still waiting for her apple juice and warm water. Zara was getting fussy, squirming in her mother's arms. "Excuse me," Jasmine called softly as Bethany passed by. The flight attendant paused, her expression tightening. "Yes. I'm still waiting for my drink and the warm water for the baby bottle." "I've been quite busy," Bethany replied. "I'll get to it when I can." From his seat several rows back, Terrell Grant observed the interaction with growing concern. As both an airline CEO and a black man in America, he had developed a keen eye for the subtle manifestations of bias. What he was witnessing wasn't the service excellence Skyline Airways promised, it was the kind of treatment he had specifically implemented policies to prevent. He made a note on his phone, careful to maintain his cover. This was exactly why he conducted these anonymous observations. Reports and training could only reveal so much, seeing the reality firsthand was different. As the flight progressed, Zara began to fuss more persistently. The cabin pressure was bothering her ears, and Jasmine needed that warm water to prepare a bottle. She tried again to catch Bethany's attention, but the flight attendant seemed to have developed a sudden case of selective vision. "I can help," came a voice from across the aisle. An older black woman named Carla Jenkins leaned over. "I raised 4 children myself." "It's those little ears, isn't it?" Jasmine nodded gratefully. "Yes, and I can't get a warm bottle ready for her." "Here," Carla said, pressing her call button. "Let's see if the other attendant responds." Thomas appeared promptly. "How can I help you, ma'am?" "This mother needs some warm water for her baby's bottle," Carla explained. "Of course," Thomas replied, glancing at Jasmine. "I'll bring that right away." As Thomas headed to the galley, Bethany intercepted him. Their conversation wasn't audible from the cabin, but her body language, the tight shoulders, the sharp gestures, suggested annoyance. When Thomas returned with the warm water, his friendly demeanor seemed strained. "Here you go," he said quietly to Jasmine. "Let me know if you need anything else." Bethany's voice came over the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to remind you that as a courtesy to all passengers, please try to keep noise levels to a minimum in the cabin. Your cooperation is appreciated." The announcement, though general in its wording, felt pointed. Several passengers glanced toward Jasmine and Zara, who wasn't crying loudly but making the occasional discontented noise as Jasmine prepared her bottle. "Don't you worry about that," Carla said firmly, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Babies are passengers too, and they have every right to make noise." Jasmine gave her a grateful smile. Allies were rare in these situations, and she appreciated not having to fight this battle alone. As Zara settled with her bottle, Jasmine's mind drifted to a similar incident during her medical residency. She had been the only black resident in a group presentation, and the senior physician had repeatedly interrupted her while letting all her white colleagues speak unimpeded. Afterward, when she'd raised the issue privately, he dismissed her concerns, saying she was being too sensitive and looking for problems. It was the same gaslighting she'd experienced countless times, the suggestion that the discrimination was all in her head, that she was the problem for noticing it, not the person perpetrating it. From his vantage point, Terrell continued observing. He saw Bethany's solicitous attention to other passengers contrasted with her cold efficiency toward Jasmine. He noticed how she chatted with the white couple about their vacation plans while barely making eye contact with the black mother trying to soothe a baby. Most concerning was the whispered conversation he overheard when Bethany passed his row, speaking to another flight attendant. "These people always expect special treatment," she muttered, not realizing the CEO of the airline was within earshot. "First class isn't designed for babies anyway." The other attendant looked uncomfortable but didn't challenge the comment. Terrell made another note on his phone, his jaw tightening. "These people." The phrase contained multitudes of prejudice in just 2 words. An elderly white man across from Terrell had also overheard. Harold Fisher, a retired professor, frowned deeply. "Excuse me," he called to Bethany. "I couldn't help overhearing your comment. What exactly did you mean by these people?" Bethany's professional mask slipped for just a moment, showing surprise and defensiveness before she recovered. "I simply meant passengers who don't consider others' comfort, sir. Would you like another drink?" "No, thank you," Harold replied, not letting her deflect. "Because it sounded to me like you were referring to that young mother trying her best with an infant. And if that's the case, I find it highly inappropriate." Other passengers were now listening to the exchange. Bethany's face flushed red. "I assure you, sir, you misunderstood. Now if you'll excuse me, I need to prepare for the meal service." As Bethany retreated to the galley, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin had shifted. What had been subtle was now obvious enough that others had noticed. The undercurrent of bias had risen to the surface, unable to hide behind the veneer of professionalism any longer. And the flight was only beginning its descent into turbulence, both literal and figurative. As the aircraft began its cruise phase over the Appalachian Mountains, baby Zara's initial contentment after her bottle was beginning to fade. Jasmine recognized the signs immediately, the subtle tugging at her ears, the increasing restlessness. The cabin pressure was causing discomfort for her infant's sensitive ear canals. Jasmine reached into the diaper bag for the pediatrician-recommended eardrops that would help equalize the pressure, only to discover the small bottle had shifted to the bottom of the bag during takeoff. She needed to stand to retrieve it properly. "Excuse me," she called softly as Bethany passed by her row again. "I need to access my bag in the overhead compartment for my baby's medicine." Bethany barely paused. "You'll have to wait. I'm serving drinks to the other passengers first." Jasmine glanced around the cabin. The drink service had been completed 15 minutes ago. Now Bethany was simply chatting with a group of businessmen 3 rows back, laughing at their jokes and refilling their glasses with attentive care. In his seat, Terrell continued taking notes on his phone, his concern growing with each interaction he witnessed. He'd implemented comprehensive anti-bias training for all Skyline employees, with special emphasis on customer-facing staff. Clearly, something wasn't working, or at least, it wasn't working with Bethany Adams. He thought back to his own journey building Skyline Airways. 10 years ago, when he'd approached investors with his business plan for a new airline focused on exceptional customer service at competitive prices, the rejections had often come with thinly veiled racial undertones. "Not sure the market will respond to your vision," one potential investor had said, emphasizing the word in a way that made it clear he meant something else entirely. "Perhaps you'd be better suited to a different industry," another had suggested. Airlines require a certain profile in leadership. Terrell had eventually secured funding, but only after bringing on a white partner as the public face of the company during the initial investment phase. That partner had later been bought out, but the experience had reinforced what Terrell already knew: excellence wasn't always enough when your skin color entered the equation. Now, as the CEO of a successful airline, he had the power to shape its culture. But culture wasn't changed through policy alone. It required consistent reinforcement and accountability, which was exactly why he was on this flight today. Zara's discomfort increased, her whimpers turning into more persistent cries. Jasmine tried rocking her, whispering soothing words, but the pain in her little ears was becoming unbearable. Harold Fisher, the elderly professor who had spoken up earlier, noticed Jasmine's predicament. He pressed his call button. Thomas responded promptly. "How can I help, sir?" "It's not for me," Harold explained. "This young mother has been trying to get assistance for quite some time. Her baby needs medicine from the overhead compartment." Thomas looked genuinely concerned. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. Let me help you with that right away." As he moved to assist Jasmine, Bethany suddenly appeared, inserting herself between Thomas and Jasmine's row. "I'll handle this, Thomas," she said firmly. "You need to finish the inventory in the galley." Thomas hesitated, glancing between Bethany and Jasmine. "The inventory can wait. This passenger needs." "I said I'll handle it," Bethany repeated, her tone leaving no room for discussion. Thomas reluctantly retreated, throwing an apologetic look toward Jasmine. Bethany turned to Jasmine, her professional smile not reaching her eyes. "What do you need from the overhead bin?" "Eardrops for my daughter," Jasmine explained. "They're in the side pocket of my diaper bag." "I'll get them for you," Bethany said. "You shouldn't be standing during flight anyway." The comment might have seemed helpful if not for the condescending tone, as if Jasmine, a medical doctor, wouldn't know basic flight safety. As Bethany retrieved the diaper bag, she made a show of holding it away from her pristine uniform, as though it might be contaminated. She placed it on the empty seat next to Jasmine without a word. "Thank you," Jasmine said, quickly finding the eardrops and administering them to Zara. "And could we possibly get some more warm water? It helps to have her drink during the pressure changes. We're beginning our descent soon." "The galley is already secured," Bethany replied, despite the fact that she had just been serving drinks to other passengers. From his seat, Terrell could see Jasmine's shoulders tense, could read the familiar signs of his wife reaching the end of her remarkable patience. He'd seen it before, that moment when the accumulated weight of 1,000 small indignities became too heavy to bear silently. Beside him, a white woman named Patricia leaned over. "Is that flight attendant for real? She's been horrible to that poor mother this entire flight." "You've noticed too?" Terrell asked, careful to maintain his cover. "Everyone has noticed," Patricia whispered. "I fly first class twice a month, and I've never seen service this bad, or this blatantly biased. Someone should report her." "I intend to," Terrell assured her, thinking of the comprehensive report he was already mentally composing. Across the aisle, Bethany was now in close conversation with another flight attendant, their backs to the cabin but their reflections visible in the darkened windows. Though their voices were low, their body language told the story, Bethany gesturing toward Jasmine's row with obvious disapproval, the other attendant nodding along. Jasmine caught fragments of their exchange. "Always the same with them, special treatment, first-class standards." Zara's crying had subsided as the eardrops took effect, but Jasmine's calm was eroding with each passing minute. She was a board-certified neurosurgeon who had graduated top of her class at Johns Hopkins. She had performed operations that required 16 hours of unbroken concentration. She had literally held human brains in her hands. And yet here she was, being treated as if she were an inconvenience, an interloper in a space where she didn't belong, all because of assumptions made about her based on her skin color. Harold, who had been watching the situation deteriorate, decided to intervene again. He stood up, his 73-year-old frame still commanding presence from decades as a university professor. "Excuse me," he called to Bethany. "I believe every passenger on this aircraft is entitled to respectful service. What I'm witnessing suggests otherwise." Bethany turned, her expression a mask of professional concern. "Sir, please return to your seat. We're experiencing some turbulence." The plane was flying perfectly smoothly, a fact not lost on anyone in the cabin. "The only turbulence I'm experiencing," Harold replied firmly, "is the disturbance caused by watching a paying passenger being treated differently than everyone else." Several other passengers murmured in agreement. The tension in the cabin had become palpable. Bethany's face flushed. "Sir, I must insist you return to your seat, or I'll have to report this as an interference with flight crew duties." "Go ahead," Harold challenged. "I'd be happy to provide a statement about what I've witnessed on this flight." Jasmine, who had been focused on Zara, looked up at the commotion. "Please," she said to Harold, "it's all right. Don't trouble yourself." "It's no trouble," Harold assured her. "I've spent my life studying civil rights history. If I've learned anything, it's that silence in the face of discrimination makes one complicit." The confrontation was drawing attention from throughout the first-class cabin. Passengers were turning in their seats, some recording with their phones. Terrell remained silent, watching everything unfold, knowing that his intervention now would change the dynamic completely. Bethany, realizing she was becoming the center of unwanted attention, adopted a placating tone. "I assure you, sir, everyone on this flight receives the same level of service. Now, we're beginning our initial descent. Please return to your seat and fasten your seatbelt." As if on cue, the captain's voice came over the PA system announcing their descent into Charlotte. Bethany used the announcement as an opportunity to retreat to the galley, but the damage was done. The undercurrent of tension had broken the surface, visible now to everyone. Jasmine sat quietly, focusing on Zara, who had finally settled against her chest. But inside, she was processing what had just happened, the public acknowledgement of what she'd experienced countless times before. It was validating but also exhausting. Why did it always require a white voice to legitimize the discrimination she faced? Terrell watched his wife's profile from several rows back, recognizing the rigid posture that meant she was holding herself together through sheer willpower. He wanted nothing more than to go to her, to take Zara for a while and give Jasmine a moment's rest. But he knew his role now was to observe, to document, to gather the evidence needed for meaningful change. As the plane began its descent into Charlotte, the confrontation seemed to have reached a stalemate. But like the weather system they were flying through, what appeared calm on the surface concealed turbulence waiting to erupt. No one, not Jasmine, not Terrell, not even Bethany herself, could have predicted just how explosive that turbulence would become. The aircraft began its final approach into Charlotte Douglas International Airport, the gentle downward trajectory causing Zara's ears to pop painfully once again. The infant's whimpers escalated into distressed cries that pierced the quiet cabin. Jasmine rocked her gently, whispering soothing words into her daughter's tiny ear, but the discomfort was too intense for the 3-month-old to understand or endure stoically. "Shoo, it's okay, sweetheart," Jasmine murmured, reaching into her diaper bag for the pacifier that sometimes helped during pressure changes. As she searched, she remembered it was in the side pocket of her carry-on in the overhead bin, the same bag Bethany had reluctantly retrieved earlier but had promptly returned to the overhead compartment. Looking around, Jasmine saw Thomas, the friendlier flight attendant, helping an elderly passenger across the aisle. Bethany was nowhere in sight. With Zara's cries intensifying, Jasmine made a split-second decision. She carefully stood, supporting Zara securely against her shoulder, and reached up to open the overhead compartment. Before she could fully extend her arm, Bethany's voice cut sharply through the cabin. "Ma'am, you need to sit down immediately. We're on final approach." Jasmine turned to explain. "My daughter's pacifier is in my bag. Her ears are hurting badly, and it might help." "The seatbelt sign is on," Bethany replied, her voice rising. "It's a federal regulation. Sit down now." "I understand," Jasmine said calmly, her professional experience helping her maintain composure despite her rising frustration. "I just need to quickly grab." "Sit down now," Bethany repeated, loud enough that every passenger in first class turned to watch. "You're endangering everyone on this aircraft with your behavior." The hyperbole was stark. Jasmine, all 5'4" of her, holding a baby while reaching for a bag, was hardly a threat to aviation safety. Several passengers exchanged glances, clearly thinking the same thing. "My baby is in pain," Jasmine explained, still calm but firm. "I'm a doctor, and I need to." "I don't care what you are," Bethany snapped, her professional veneer cracking completely. "Rules apply to everyone, even you people who think you're special." The cabin went silent. Even Zara seemed to sense the sudden tension, her cries subsiding to hiccuping sobs. "What do you mean by, you people?" Jasmine asked quietly. Bethany's eyes widened slightly, perhaps realizing she'd crossed a line that couldn't be easily dismissed as a misunderstanding. But instead of retreating, she doubled down. "People who think the rules don't apply to them," she said, but her tone conveyed a different meaning entirely. From his seat, Terrell watched the exchange with growing alarm. He recognized the coded language, the thinly veiled contempt. As a black man in corporate America, he'd heard variations of it throughout his career. "She just needs to sit her uppity ass down and stop causing trouble," Bethany muttered to Thomas as she brushed past him, just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. That was it, the slur that crossed from implicit to explicit bias. Jasmine froze, the word hitting her like a physical blow. "What did you just say?" she asked, her voice now carrying a steel edge that her surgical residents would have recognized as a warning sign. Bethany turned back, seemingly surprised that Jasmine had heard her. For a moment, something like shame flickered across her face. But rather than apologize, she chose aggression. "I said sit down and follow the rules like everyone else," she said loudly, stepping closer to Jasmine. "Give me that bag." Without waiting for permission, Bethany grabbed the diaper bag from Jasmine's shoulder, yanking it with enough force that Jasmine had to step back to maintain her balance while holding Zara. "Don't touch my things," Jasmine said firmly, the doctor's authoritative tone emerging. "And lower your voice. You're scaring my baby." "Don't tell me how to do my job," Bethany retorted, her face now inches from Jasmine's. "I've been flying since before you could afford a coach ticket, let alone first class." The implication was clear, Bethany couldn't conceive that Jasmine belonged in first class through her own achievements. Jasmine took a deep breath. "I'm going to sit down now, as you've asked. But I want your name and employee number. This interaction is completely inappropriate." Something in Bethany snapped. Perhaps it was being challenged by someone she'd already decided was beneath her. Perhaps it was the realization that other passengers were watching, many clearly sympathetic to Jasmine. Or perhaps it was simply the culmination of biases that had been nurtured over years. Whatever the trigger, what happened next shocked everyone in the cabin. Bethany's hand moved in a swift arc, connecting with Jasmine's cheek with a crack that seemed to echo in the suddenly silent cabin. The slap was hard enough to leave an immediate red mark on Jasmine's skin. Zara, startled by the sudden movement and noise, erupted into terrified wails. Jasmine stood perfectly still, one hand cradling her crying daughter, the other rising slowly to her stinging cheek, her expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. Then the cabin erupted. "Did you see that? She hit her. Oh my God!" Passengers were half rising from their seats, phones recording, voices overlapping in a cacophony of outrage. Harold, the elderly professor, was on his feet instantly. "That's assault. I saw it clearly." Thomas rushed forward, his face pale with shock. "Bethany, what are you doing? Go to the back, now." Bethany herself seemed stunned by her own action, her hands still raised, her eyes wide with the realization of what she'd done. And then another voice cut through the chaos, deep, authoritative, and cold with controlled fury. "As the CEO of this airline, I'm officially relieving you of duty, effective immediately." Terrell Grant stood in the aisle, his 6'2" frame imposing even in casual clothes, his identification badge now visible in his hand. Bethany's face drained of color as recognition dawned. "Mr. Grant? I didn't. I wasn't." "You weren't what?" Terrell asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Weren't aware that assaulting a passenger is grounds for immediate termination? Weren't thinking I'd be on this flight observing your repeated discriminatory behavior toward my wife and child? Or weren't expecting to be held accountable?" The revelation sent another shock wave through the cabin. The CEO's wife. The woman Bethany had been treating with contempt, and had physically assaulted, was married to the owner of the entire airline. What do you think about this shocking moment? Comment number 1 if you believe Bethany should be immediately terminated for her actions. Comment number 2 if you think she deserves a chance to explain herself. This situation is escalating quickly, and I want to know where you stand. Like and subscribe if you've ever witnessed discrimination and wondered if justice would be served. How would you react if you saw someone get slapped on a flight? Let me know in the comments below. Now, what happens next as the plane lands with a flight attendant who just assaulted the CEO's wife? Let's continue this incredible story. The first-class cabin of Flight SL-447 had transformed from a space of privilege and comfort into something resembling a courtroom, with passengers as witnesses, Bethany Adams as the defendant, and Terrell Grant unexpectedly serving as both judge and plaintiff. The revelation of his identity had stunned everyone, none more so than Bethany herself, who stood frozen, her face ashen. "Thomas," Terrell said to the other flight attendant, his voice level but authoritative, "please escort Ms. Adams to the rear galley and have her remain there for the duration of the flight. Captain Reynolds needs to be informed immediately of what's occurred." Thomas nodded, gently taking Bethany's elbow. "Come with me, please." Bethany seemed to emerge from her shock, looking frantically around the cabin as if searching for an ally or escape route. Finding neither, she tried a different tactic. "Mr. Grant, please, there's been a terrible misunderstanding," she pleaded, her voice shaking. "I would never intentionally." "Stop," Terrell interrupted, raising his hand. "This isn't the time or place for your explanation. What just happened was witnessed by a cabin full of passengers and captured on multiple devices. There is no misunderstanding about you striking my wife while she was holding our infant daughter." The words hung in the air, their weight undeniable. Several passengers nodded in agreement, phones still recording. "But sir, she was." "I said stop," Terrell repeated, his calm demeanor belied by the cold fury in his eyes. "Every second you remain in this cabin is making this situation worse for yourself and for this airline. Go to the back now, or I'll add insubordination to the list of termination causes." Thomas tugged gently on Bethany's arm. "Please, Bethany. Let's go." Finally, Bethany allowed herself to be led away, though not before casting one last venomous glance at Jasmine. A look that suggested she blamed Jasmine for her downfall rather than her own actions. As Bethany disappeared into the rear of the aircraft, Terrell immediately turned his attention to his wife and daughter. He crossed the aisle in 2 strides, kneeling beside Jasmine's seat. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, one hand gently touching the red mark on her cheek, the other reaching to support Zara, who was still crying. "I'm okay," Jasmine replied, her voice steady despite the shock. "Just get us on the ground safely. We can deal with everything else after that." Terrell nodded, understanding his wife's priorities. He took Zara from her arms, cradling the infant against his chest with practiced ease. The baby's cries began to subside as he gently patted her back. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the captain's voice over the PA system, "this is Captain Reynolds speaking. We're aware of an incident that has occurred in the cabin. As a precautionary measure, we'll be prioritized for landing at Charlotte Douglas International. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We'll be on the ground in approximately 10 minutes." The announcement confirmed what many had suspected: the situation had escalated beyond a cabin disturbance to something requiring expedited landing procedures. As Terrell settled into the empty seat beside Jasmine, still holding Zara, passengers began to process what they'd witnessed. The cabin buzzed with whispered conversations and the occasional flash of a phone camera capturing the CEO comforting his family. "I can't believe she hit you," Terrell said quietly, his business persona momentarily giving way to the concerned husband. "I saw the tension building, but I never thought it would escalate to physical assault." "Neither did I," Jasmine admitted. "I've dealt with plenty of microaggressions before, but never anything like this." She touched her cheek again, wincing slightly. She was stronger than she looked. "She'll never work in aviation again," Terrell promised, his jaw tight. "And that's just the beginning." From across the aisle, Harold leaned toward them. "Excuse me, Dr. Washington, Mr. Grant. I want you to know that I'd be happy to provide a statement about what I witnessed. The behavior displayed by that flight attendant was completely unacceptable." "Thank you," Jasmine said sincerely. "That means a lot." Other passengers began offering similar support. "I have the whole thing recorded," said a young woman from the row behind them, holding up her phone. "From the moment she told you to sit down until, well, everything after. It's all clear as day." Patricia, who had been sitting near Terrell, added, "I'm an attorney with Jenkins and Barlow. If you need any legal advice regarding this incident, I'd be happy to help." The outpouring of support was somewhat surprising to Jasmine. Too often in her experience, incidents of discrimination were met with awkward silence or even victim blaming. This unanimous condemnation of Bethany's behavior felt like a rare moment of clarity and consensus. In the cockpit, Captain Reynolds was communicating with air traffic control. "Charlotte approach, Skyline 447 requesting priority landing. We have a situation involving a crew member that requires immediate attention upon arrival. Skyline 447, Charlotte approach. Priority landing approved. Descend to 5,000 feet and proceed direct to runway 18C. Emergency services standing by as requested." The captain turned to his first officer. "Not how I expected this flight to go. The CEO himself on board, and now this." The first officer shook his head. "I always thought Bethany was a bit harsh, but this is something else entirely. Striking a passenger? With the company owner watching? That's career suicide." In the main cabin, news of the incident had spread like wildfire. Passengers in economy were refreshing their social media feeds, as the first videos began appearing online with hashtags like #SkylineSlap and #FlyingWhileBlack already trending. The airline's social media team, caught completely off guard, was scrambling to formulate a response as mentions of Skyline Airways exploded across platforms. Their initial generic statement about investigating an incident only fueled the fire as more detailed passenger accounts emerged. Back in first class, Thomas had returned from the rear galley, his professional demeanor strained by the extraordinary circumstances. "Mr. Grant," he said quietly, "the captain asked me to inform you that we've been cleared for priority landing. Airport police will be meeting the aircraft upon arrival." Terrell nodded. "Thank you, Thomas. And thank you for trying to intervene earlier. I noticed your attempts to provide proper service were being blocked." Thomas looked relieved at the acknowledgement. "I should have done more. I knew something wasn't right with how she was treating your family." "We'll address all of that after landing," Terrell assured him. "For now, just help us get everyone on the ground safely." As the plane began its final descent, Jasmine leaned her head against Terrell's shoulder, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had kept her composed during the confrontation was wearing off, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness familiar to anyone who has experienced racism's unexpected assaults. "I just wanted to visit my mom," she whispered. "A simple flight with our daughter. Why does it always have to be so complicated?" Terrell had no answer that could erase the reality they both lived with. Instead, he simply held her hand, Zara now sleeping peacefully against his chest, unaware of the storm her parents navigated daily. The aircraft touched down smoothly on runway 18C at Charlotte Douglas International Airport, taxiing directly to a remote gate where 3 police vehicles and an airport operations car waited on the tarmac. As the plane came to a complete stop, Captain Reynolds made one final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at Charlotte. Due to the incident that occurred during our flight, we'll be deplaning in a slightly different manner. Airport police will be boarding the aircraft momentarily. We ask that you remain seated until further instructions are provided. On behalf of the crew, most of the crew, we apologize for any distress caused by today's events." The cabin door opened, and 2 uniformed officers boarded, followed by the airport's operations manager. They conferred briefly with Thomas at the front galley before making their way to the rear of the aircraft where Bethany was being kept isolated. Terrell stood, still holding Zara. "I need to address this situation. Will you be okay for a few minutes?" Jasmine nodded. "Go. Do what you need to do." As Terrell moved toward the rear to speak with the authorities, passengers began pulling out their phones again, some already posting updates to social media, others calling friends and family to share the dramatic story. "You won't believe what happened on my flight. It's all over Twitter already. The flight attendant actually slapped her. The CEO was on board incognito. Talk about being in the wrong place at the wrong time." Outside the aircraft, news crews were already gathering, alerted by the social media firestorm and the police presence at the gate. What had begun as a routine domestic flight had transformed into a viral moment that would soon force a national conversation about race, privilege, and accountability in America's skies. And for Jasmine, Terrell, and baby Zara, their journey had only just begun. The jetway connected to the aircraft with a subtle thump, but no passengers were allowed to deplane yet. Inside the cabin, 2 Charlotte-Mecklenburg police officers stood in the galley with Bethany Adams, who had transformed from the confident, authoritative flight attendant of 3 hours ago into a tearful, stammering figure of regret. "I didn't mean to hit her," Bethany insisted, her makeup streaked with tears. "It was a reflex. She was being combative, and I felt threatened." Officer James Wilson maintained a neutral expression as he took notes. "Ma'am, we've already received preliminary statements from multiple passengers that contradict that account. You're not under arrest at this time, but I need to advise you that anything you say can be used in later proceedings." In the main cabin, a representative from Skyline's corporate office had boarded and was addressing the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Skyline Airways, I want to sincerely apologize for the incident that occurred on this flight. We're taking this matter extremely seriously. As you deplane, officers will be available in the jet bridge for anyone wishing to provide a statement. Additionally, customer service representatives are waiting in the terminal to assist with any connection issues this delay may have caused." Meanwhile, Terrell was in the cockpit, on the phone with Skyline's general counsel. "Sandra, this is going viral as we speak. We need a statement drafted immediately that makes our zero-tolerance policy absolutely clear. Yes, I witnessed the entire incident personally. No, there are no gray areas here. She struck a passenger, who happens to be my wife, while she was holding our infant daughter. I understand the legal implications, but our response needs to be unequivocal." As he ended the call, Captain Reynolds turned to him. "Sir, I want you to know that the entire flight crew is horrified by what happened. Bethany's actions don't represent who we are as a company." "I know that, Jim," Terrell replied, using the captain's first name. They had known each other for years. "But this incident reveals serious gaps in how our policies are being implemented. One employee's actions can undo years of work building an inclusive culture. In first class, Jasmine sat quietly with Zara, who had finally fallen asleep after the ordeal. Carla Jenkins, the older black woman who had supported her earlier, stopped by her seat before deplaning. "You handled yourself with such dignity, dear," Carla said softly. "Too much dignity, perhaps. In my day, we had to swallow these indignities silently. But you young folks shouldn't have to. Not anymore." Jasmine gave her a tired smile. "Thank you for speaking up when you did. It meant a lot not to be alone in that moment." "We're never alone," Carla replied, patting Jasmine's hand. "Even when it feels that way." As passengers began to deplane, the atmosphere was unlike the usual hurried exit. People moved slowly, many stopping to express support to Jasmine or to share their contact information in case she needed witnesses later. Others were already on their phones, telling friends and family about the dramatic flight. When Terrell returned from the cockpit, he found Harold Fisher still waiting nearby. "Mr. Grant," Harold said earnestly, "I've spent my career teaching civil rights history at Vanderbilt. What happened today is a textbook example of how bias escalates when left unchecked. I hope your company uses this as a watershed moment." "That's exactly what we intend to do, Professor," Terrell assured him. "Would you be willing to share your observations with our training department? Your perspective would be valuable." "I'd be honored," Harold replied, handing Terrell his card. Too often, these incidents get buried under corporate damage control. This is an opportunity for real change. Outside on the tarmac, the situation was growing more complicated. News vans from local Charlotte stations had already positioned themselves as close to the gate as airport security would allow. Reporters were interviewing deplaning passengers, who eagerly shared details of the midair confrontation. "We've received reports of a racially motivated assault on board a Skyline Airways flight," one reporter was saying into a camera. "Sources tell us the flight attendant involved has been detained by police," and in a dramatic twist, the CEO of the airline witnessed the entire incident. Inside the terminal, Skyline's public relations team was in full crisis mode. The company's social media mentions had exploded, with the hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack trending nationally. Early videos of the confrontation, captured from multiple angles by passengers, were already being shared widely, each one collecting thousands of views by the minute. "We need the CEO to make a statement as soon as possible," insisted Miranda Chen, Skyline's director of public relations, speaking urgently into her phone as she strode through the terminal toward the gate. "This is developing too quickly to contain with a press release." Back on the aircraft, Jasmine and Terrell were among the last to deplane, deliberately waiting until most passengers and media had cleared. An airport operations manager approached them with a discreet offer. "Dr. Washington, Mr. Grant, we can escort you through a private terminal entrance if you prefer to avoid the media presence." Terrell looked to Jasmine, leaving the decision to her. After a moment's consideration, Jasmine shook her head. "No. I won't sneak out as if I've done something wrong. We'll exit normally." Terrell nodded, understanding her choice. Throughout her career, Jasmine had refused to be diminished or made invisible by racism. Today would be no different. As they stepped into the terminal, cameras immediately turned in their direction. Reporters called out questions. "Dr. Washington, can you tell us what happened on the flight?" "Mr. Grant, will Skyline be firing the flight attendant involved? Is it true the assault was racially motivated?" Terrell raised a hand, quieting the barrage. "We'll be making a formal statement shortly. Right now, our priority is the well-being of our daughter, who was understandably distressed by the incident. We ask for a moment of privacy as we exit the terminal." Surprisingly, the request was respected. The reporters stepped back, allowing the family to proceed toward the exit where a company car waited. Once settled in the vehicle, Jasmine finally allowed herself a moment of vulnerability, leaning back against the seat with closed eyes. "Are you sure you're okay?" Terrell asked gently. "We should have that checked," he added, nodding toward the still visible mark on her cheek. "I'm a doctor, remember?" Jasmine replied with a weak smile. "It's just a slap. Physically, anyway." They both understood the unspoken reality. The emotional impact would linger long after the red mark faded. At Skyline headquarters, just minutes from the airport, an emergency executive team meeting was already underway. Sandra Powell, the general counsel, was outlining the potential legal ramifications. Beyond the obvious assault charges, we're looking at potential civil rights violations, which could trigger federal involvement. The fact that Mr. Grant witnessed the incident personally is both a blessing and a complication. His testimony carries weight, but defense counsel could argue bias given that Dr. Washington is his wife. Victoria Mercer, the chief human resources officer, jumped in. "Bethany Adams has been with us for 15 years. Her personnel file shows 3 previous complaints from minority passengers, all of which were investigated but deemed inconclusive. Nothing rose to this level of severity. Those complaints should have been a red flag," Terrell said as he entered the conference room, having come directly from the airport. 3 similar complaints establish a pattern that deserved closer scrutiny. The room fell silent, executives straightening in their chairs as their CEO took his place at the head of the table. "Where do we stand with Bethany now?" Terrell asked. "She's been formally suspended pending investigation, though termination is inevitable given the circumstances," Victoria reported. "She was released by police but may face charges once the district attorney reviews the evidence. She's already retained legal counsel and is claiming the incident was not racially motivated." "Of course she is," Terrell said, his tone reflecting the familiar exhaustion of someone who had heard such denials countless times before. "No one ever admits to racial bias, even when it's captured on video." Miranda Chen, who had followed Terrell from the airport, pulled up a tablet displaying social media metrics. "Sir, the video has been viewed over 2 million times in the past hour alone. We're seeing widespread calls for boycotts, but also significant support from people commending your immediate response on board. How we handle the next 24 hours will determine which narrative prevails." Terrell took a moment to consider their options. As a CEO, he needed to think about the company's reputation, legal exposure, and financial impact. As a husband, he was still processing the anger of watching his wife be assaulted. As a black man in America, he recognized the moment's broader significance beyond his personal experience. "Here's what we're going to do," he said finally. "First, Bethany Adams is terminated, effective immediately. The standard investigation will still proceed, but the outcome regarding her employment is not in question. Second, I want a comprehensive audit of all customer complaints involving potential bias from the past 5 years, not just the ones that were deemed credible. Third, we're going to announce an overhaul of our diversity training program, with emphasis on recognizing and addressing implicit bias." He paused, looking around the table at his executive team, a deliberately diverse group he had built over years. "And finally, we're going to be transparent about this incident and our response. No corporate doublespeak, no vague promises to do better. We acknowledge what happened, we take concrete action, and we use this as a catalyst for genuine change." The team nodded in agreement, though several exchanged glances that silently acknowledged the challenging path ahead. Meanwhile, across town, Bethany Adams sat in her attorney's office, presenting a very different version of events. "They're making me the scapegoat," she insisted, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Yes, I lost my temper, and I shouldn't have touched her. But it had nothing to do with race. She was violating safety protocols during landing, and when I tried to enforce the rules, she became belligerent." Her attorney, Maxwell Winters, looked skeptical. "The videos circulating online don't support that interpretation, Bethany. Multiple passengers can be heard reacting to your use of phrases like, 'you people,' and what appears to be a racial slur muttered under your breath." "That's not what I meant," Bethany protested. "It's being taken out of context. I'm not racist. I have black friends. I've flown with black pilots and crew members for years without any issues." Maxwell sighed, recognizing the familiar protestations of someone confronting their own biased behavior for the first time. Bethany, I'll represent you to the best of my ability, but you need to understand the seriousness of this situation. This isn't just about losing your job. You're at the center of what's rapidly becoming a national conversation about race and privilege. As evening fell over Charlotte, the story continued to expand beyond the individuals directly involved. News programs featured panels discussing the broader implications. Social media users shared their own experiences of discrimination while traveling. Aviation industry experts debated the adequacy of current training protocols for flight crews. And in a quiet hotel suite, Jasmine and Terrell Washington Grant sat with their daughter sleeping peacefully between them, watching the story of their private trauma unfold in the public sphere, becoming something larger than themselves. A symbol, a catalyst, a case study in how racism manifests in everyday interactions and how institutions respond when forced to confront it. Is this what you wanted? Jasmine asked softly, nodding toward the television where their story led the evening news. When you decided to fly incognito today? Terrell shook his head. I wanted to observe our service standards, maybe catch some minor issues to address. I never imagined. He trailed off, reaching for her hand across the sleeping form of their daughter. What happens now? Jasmine asked, the question encompassing far more than just the immediate aftermath. Now, Terrell said, we turn this moment into movement. Not just for Skyline, but for our daughter. So that maybe, just maybe, when she's old enough to fly alone, the color of her skin won't determine how she's treated. As they sat in contemplative silence, their phones buzzed simultaneously with news alerts. The story was evolving yet again, taking on dimensions neither of them could have anticipated when they boarded their flight that morning. By the following morning, the incident aboard Skyline Flight SL-447 had transcended a single airline dispute to become a national flashpoint in America's ongoing conversation about race. Major networks led their morning broadcasts with the story, featuring experts analyzing the video from multiple angles. What makes this case particularly significant, said Dr. Elaine Carter, a sociologist specializing in race relations, during a cable news interview, is that it captures the progression from microaggressions to overt racism to physical violence, all in a setting where power dynamics are clearly established. Flight attendants hold authority in aircraft cabins, and we see how that authority can be weaponized when combined with racial bias. In hotel room 1542 of the Charlotte Regency, Jasmine scrolled through her phone with increasing disbelief. Her social media accounts had exploded overnight, with thousands of messages from strangers sharing similar experiences or offering support. Even more unsettling were the hate messages, people claiming she had provoked the incident or suggesting the entire situation was staged for publicity or financial gain. This is overwhelming, she murmured to Terrell, who was simultaneously managing the corporate crisis while trying to support his family. I've gone from being a neurosurgeon and mother to being a hashtag overnight. Terrell looked up from his laptop. We can still issue a statement asking for privacy. You don't have to be the face of this if you don't want to be. Jasmine considered this for a moment, watching Zara playing contentedly on the hotel room floor, blissfully unaware of the storm surrounding her family. No, she decided finally. Retreating now would suggest we have something to hide. Besides, my entire career has been about breaking barriers. I can't back down when it gets uncomfortable. Terrell nodded, understanding and respecting his wife's resilience. It was one of the qualities that had drawn him to her when they first met at a medical charity gala 6 years earlier, her unwavering commitment to standing her ground with dignity. Across town, Skyline's headquarters was operating in full crisis mode. The company's stock had opened down 6% as investors reacted to the negative publicity and hashtags calling for boycotts trended online. The executive floor had transformed into a war room, with representatives from legal, PR, human resources, and operations working to coordinate a comprehensive response. Miranda Chen, the PR director, addressed the assembled team. The latest metrics show the original video has been viewed over 15 million times across platforms. We're seeing significant engagement from celebrities and public figures, most condemning the incident and calling for action beyond just firing the flight attendant. Speaking of which, Sandra Powell, the general counsel, interjected, Bethany Adams' attorney has reached out. They're positioning for a wrongful termination suit, claiming she was made a scapegoat and denied due process. Victoria Mercer from HR shook her head. That's a non-starter. Physical assault of a passenger is explicitly listed as grounds for immediate termination in our employment contracts. The fact that it was witnessed by multiple passengers and the CEO himself makes this about as clear-cut as cases get. Nevertheless, Sandra cautioned, we need to ensure every procedural detail is followed correctly. The last thing we need is for Adams to become a counter-narrative sympathetic figure because we mishandled her termination. Terrell, joining the meeting via secure video link from his hotel, was clear in his direction. We'll follow proper procedures, but let's not lose sight of the bigger picture. This incident exposed a failure in our systems. How did someone with Bethany's attitudes toward minority passengers remain in a customer-facing role for 15 years? What other biases might be affecting our passenger experience that we're not seeing? His question hung in the air, uncomfortable but necessary. Meanwhile, the public narrative continued evolving at lightning speed. By midday, competing hashtags were trending. Hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack highlighted similar experiences of discrimination in air travel, while hashtag #SupportBethany gathered momentum among those who felt the flight attendant was being unfairly villainized. Journalists began digging deeper, uncovering patterns that extended beyond Skyline Airways. Industry data showed that complaints about discriminatory treatment were filed disproportionately by passengers of color across all major airlines, but rarely resulted in substantial action. Flight attendant unions released statements supporting proper investigation procedures while emphasizing the stresses their members face daily. Corporate responses from other airlines carefully acknowledged the seriousness of the incident without directly criticizing a competitor, many using the opportunity to reaffirm their own commitment to inclusive service. By afternoon, a reporter from the Washington Post had uncovered 2 previous complaints against Bethany Adams specifically mentioning racial bias, both filed by black business class passengers who alleged they received inferior service compared to white travelers. Neither complaint had resulted in disciplinary action, with internal notes suggesting the situations were deemed subjective and lacking corroboration. When this information went public, the pressure on Skyline intensified. The NAACP issued a statement calling for a comprehensive review of complaint handling procedures across the aviation industry. Congressional representatives from the Aviation Oversight Committee announced plans for hearings on discrimination in air travel. For Jasmine, the expanding scope of the conversation brought mixed emotions. While vindicating in some ways, proof that her experience wasn't isolated or imagined, it also heightened the burden of unintentionally becoming the face of a movement. Her hospital colleagues had created a protective circle around her, fielding media requests and managing her patient schedule. The chief of neurosurgery, Dr. Lawrence Montgomery, called personally to offer support. "Take all the time you need, Jasmine," he assured her. "And for what it's worth, the entire department stands with you." What happened was inexcusable. Jasmine appreciated the support but detected something in his tone, perhaps relief that the discrimination had happened elsewhere, not within the hospital walls. She wondered if he recognized the similar, though less dramatic, indignities she'd faced in medicine. The patients who requested the real doctor when she entered their rooms. The nurses who verified her orders more frequently than those of her white colleagues. The subtle exclusion from informal mentorship networks that advanced careers. By late afternoon, Jasmine and Terrell had agreed to a single interview with a respected national news program to address the situation directly. As they prepared in their hotel suite, Jasmine's phone rang, her mother calling from Atlanta. "Baby, are you really okay?" Her mother's voice carried the weight of a generation that had endured far worse discrimination with far less recourse. "I'm watching all this unfold, and I'm worried about you being thrust into this spotlight." "I'm handling it, Mom," Jasmine assured her, though the strain in her voice betrayed her exhaustion. "We need to see this through." "I know that tone," her mother replied. It's the same one you used when you told me you were applying to medical school after those advisors said you should consider nursing instead. Just remember to protect your peace through all this. The world will take everything you're willing to give and still ask for more. After ending the call, Jasmine stood at the hotel window, looking out over the Charlotte skyline as evening approached. The cityscape was beautiful, lights beginning to twinkle against the darkening blue sky. Yet she couldn't help but reflect on how differently she experienced this same country compared to many of those living and working in the buildings before her. Terrell joined her at the window, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. The car will be here in an hour for the interview. Are you sure you're up for this? Jasmine nodded. Yes. But I've been thinking, this can't just be about one flight attendant on one airline. If we're going to do this interview, I want to address the systemic issues. This isn't about creating a villain in Bethany Adams. It's about acknowledging the environment that allows the Bethany Adamses of the world to flourish. Terrell considered this, understanding the delicate balance he faced as both CEO and husband. From a corporate perspective, that broadens the conversation in ways that could be challenging for Skyline. But as your husband, and as a black man in America, I agree completely. Their thoughtful moment was interrupted by Terrell's phone. It was Sandra Powell, the general counsel, with unexpected news. Terrell, we've just received information that significantly complicates the situation. Our team has been reviewing past customer complaints as you directed, and we've discovered something concerning. A first-class passenger filed a detailed complaint about Bethany Adams 3 months ago, alleging explicitly racist behavior. The complaint was reviewed by our customer relations department and deemed resolved after Bethany provided a contradicting statement. The passenger was offered frequent flyer miles as compensation, but no disciplinary action was taken. Why am I just hearing about this now? Terrell asked, his voice tightening. The system worked as designed, the complaint was handled at the departmental level without escalation to executive management. But here's where it gets problematic. The passenger specifically requested that the incident be reported to diversity compliance officers, which should have triggered an automatic flag to HR for bias investigation. That flag never happened. Terrell's expression darkened. So we had a system failure. Yes, Sandra confirmed. And it appears this wasn't an isolated incident. We're finding multiple similar cases where bias complaints were resolved with customer compensation rather than addressing the underlying employee behavior. As Terrell ended the call, Jasmine could read the additional weight that had settled on his shoulders. What is it? She asked. Evidence that what happened to you was preventable, he replied grimly. The systems I thought we had in place to prevent exactly this kind of incident, they've been circumvented or ignored. The revelation added another dimension to their already complex situation. For Terrell, it meant acknowledging that his company, the airline he had built with the explicit goal of creating an inclusive corporate culture, had failed not just in a single moment with a single employee, but systematically, over time. For Jasmine, it confirmed what she had always suspected, that her experience was not an anomaly but part of a pattern, one that continued partly because those with the power to change it could ignore it until it affected them personally. As the car arrived to take them to the television studio, they both understood that the interview ahead would shape not just public perception of the incident, but potentially the future of how discrimination in customer service environments was addressed across industries. What had begun as a routine flight had evolved into something neither of them had sought but both were now committed to addressing, a pivotal moment in America's ongoing struggle to reconcile its ideals with its realities. 3 weeks after the incident, Jasmine and Terrell's spacious Baltimore penthouse still didn't quite feel like home. The familiar space had been transformed, not physically, but emotionally, by the viral moment that had thrust them unwillingly into the national spotlight. Jasmine sat in the nursery, gently rocking Zara to sleep. The baby had been more irritable since the flight, startling easily at loud noises and clinging desperately to her mother. The pediatrician had assured them this was likely temporary, a normal reaction to the traumatic experience, but the knowledge did little to ease Jasmine's guilt. She couldn't help feeling that her decision to confront Bethany's behavior had somehow harmed her daughter. "She's finally asleep," Jasmine whispered as Terrell appeared in the doorway. She carefully placed Zara in her crib, both parents watching their daughter's peaceful breathing for a moment before quietly exiting the room. In their living room, evidence of their new reality was everywhere. Security had been enhanced following online threats. Their personal phone numbers had been changed after being leaked by anonymous users claiming to support Bethany. Stacks of mail, some supportive, some hateful, had been screened and sorted by the personal assistant they'd reluctantly hired to manage the deluge. "How was your first day back?" Terrell asked as Jasmine collapsed onto the sofa beside him. She sighed, running a hand through her natural curls. "Strange. Everyone wants to be supportive, but no one quite knows what to say. There's this elephant in the room everywhere I go. I'm no longer just Dr. Washington, I'm that doctor from the plane video." Terrell nodded in understanding. His own return to Skyline headquarters had been similarly uncomfortable. "It's the same at the office. Half the executives are walking on eggshells around me, afraid to say anything that might be misconstrued. The other half are suddenly racial justice warriors, bringing me articles about diversity initiatives like I haven't been implementing them for years." Their television interview had aired nationally 2 weeks earlier, generating both praise and criticism. They had chosen to speak candidly about the incident while placing it in the broader context of everyday discrimination. Jasmine had been particularly eloquent, describing how the accumulation of small, discriminatory acts created the foundation for larger, more explicit racism. "A slap doesn't come out of nowhere," she had explained to the interviewer. "It's preceded by 1,000 subtle messages that certain people are less deserving of dignity and respect. What happened on that plane was simply the visible eruption of biases that usually operate just below the surface." The interview had resonated widely, with over 11 million views online in addition to its television audience. It had also intensified the backlash from those who felt Bethany Adams was being unfairly demonized. Bethany herself had attempted a public apology, appearing on a competing network with her attorney. Her statement had struck many as insufficient, focusing more on the stress she had been under and less on her actual behavior. "I deeply regret my actions in that moment," she had said, dabbing carefully at dry eyes. "The pressure of ensuring flight safety while managing difficult passengers overwhelmed me. But I want to be absolutely clear that race played no role in my reaction." The assertion had struck Jasmine and Terrell as absurd given the documented pattern of behavior, but they had chosen not to respond directly, focusing instead on systemic changes. At Baltimore Memorial Hospital, Jasmine's colleagues had rallied around her in ways that were both touching and occasionally uncomfortable. The chief of surgery had publicly commended her professionalism and offered her additional resources, while the hospital board issued a statement supporting her. But there were also awkward attempts at solidarity, white colleagues suddenly sharing their own brush with discrimination stories that often missed the point entirely, or the uncomfortable silences that fell when she entered break rooms. Dr. Rita Patel, one of the few other women of color in the neurosurgery department, had pulled Jasmine aside after a challenging procedure. "I've been watching how you're handling all this," Rita said quietly as they scrubbed out. "It's admirable, but I need to ask, are you really okay?" Jasmine had paused, the automatic "I'm fine" dying on her lips. "No," she admitted finally. "I'm not okay. I'm angry. I'm exhausted. And I'm tired of being the spokesperson for an experience most of our colleagues will never understand." Rita had nodded. "That's why I created a support group for doctors of color after my own incident last year." She was referring to a patient who had refused her care despite her expertise, demanding a real American doctor. The hospital had supported her right to continue as the patient's physician, but the emotional toll had been significant. "We meet monthly," Rita continued. "No white tears, no explaining our experiences, just support from people who get it. You should join us." The invitation had been a lifeline Jasmine hadn't realized she needed. Meanwhile, at Skyline Airways, Terrell was facing his own challenges. The comprehensive audit he had ordered revealed disturbing patterns. Bias complaints were systematically downplayed, with only 3% ever resulting in employee disciplinary action. The Customer Relations Department had developed unofficial shortcuts for resolving such complaints with token compensation while protecting staff from consequences. "It's not just about Bethany Adams," Terrell told his executive team during a tense meeting. "It's about a culture that made her behavior possible. Every person who reviewed a complaint about her and chose passenger compensation over accountability shares responsibility for what happened to my wife." The room had fallen silent, several executives shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "I understand the impulse to protect employees," Terrell continued. "But who was protecting our passengers? Who was ensuring that every person who boards our aircraft receives equal dignity regardless of their skin color or background?" The question had prompted the resignation of Skyline's VP of Customer Relations, who acknowledged significant failures of oversight in his department. 3 other managers directly involved in mishandling previous complaints were placed on administrative leave pending review. The incident had prompted changes beyond personnel. Terrell had immediately implemented new bias complaint protocols, establishing a direct escalation path that bypassed departmental filtering. Mandatory anti-bias training was expanded from a one-time orientation session to quarterly refreshers with practical scenarios. Most significantly, he had established a passenger advocacy board with independent oversight, including several civil rights attorneys and diversity experts. These changes had been met with mixed reactions within the company. Many employees, particularly people of color, expressed relief and renewed commitment to the airline. Others grumbled about overcorrection and walking on eggshells. "You're risking employee morale," cautioned one board member during an emergency meeting. "The frontline staff feel like they're all being punished for one person's actions." "This isn't punishment," Terrell had countered firmly. "It's correction of a systemic failure." And frankly, if acknowledging bias and treating all passengers with equal respect damages someone's morale, perhaps Skyline isn't the right place for them. Now, sitting in their living room after their respective first days back at work, Jasmine and Terrell were processing these parallel journeys. "The hospital wants me to speak at their diversity symposium next month," Jasmine said, massaging her temples. "They think my unique perspective as both a physician and a victim of discrimination would be valuable." Terrell raised an eyebrow. "And how do you feel about that?" "Conflicted. On one hand, it's an opportunity to shape institutional policy. On the other, I don't want to be defined by this incident for the rest of my career." She paused, considering. "But something Rita said today resonated with me." She pointed out that refusing to speak about it doesn't make the experience go away, it just ensures that nothing changes. Terrell nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking along similar lines with the airline. The easy path would be to fire Bethany, make some public statements about zero tolerance, and move on. But that wouldn't address the environment that allowed her behavior to go unchecked for so long." "What about the lawsuit?" Jasmine asked. The question hung heavily between them. Bethany Adams had filed a wrongful termination suit against Skyline, claiming she was made a scapegoat for systemic issues. While legally dubious given the clear violation of company policy, the suit had become a rallying point for those who felt the response had been excessive. More concerning was the counternarrative emerging in certain corners of the media, that Jasmine had somehow provoked the incident by being difficult or entitled. These characterizations played into long-standing stereotypes about black women, particularly successful ones, that both Jasmine and Terrell had confronted throughout their careers. "Our legal team is confident the suit will be dismissed," Terrell replied. "But the court of public opinion is another matter entirely." Their conversation was interrupted by Terrell's phone. It was Miranda Chen, Skyline's PR director. "Sir, I'm sorry to disturb you at home, but we've just received information that Bethany Adams has been offered a book deal. The working title is, Cancelled at 30,000 Feet, How One Mistake Destroyed My Life. Her publisher is positioning it as an exploration of cancel culture and rush to judgment in America." Terrell exhaled slowly. Thank you for letting me know, Miranda. We'll need to prepare a response, but not tonight. Let's discuss it in the morning. After ending the call, he turned to find Jasmine watching him with a knowing expression. It's never really over, is it? She said quietly. No matter how clear-cut the situation, there's always a narrative that turns the perpetrator into the victim. No, it's never over, Terrell agreed. But we keep pushing forward anyway. As if on cue, Zara's cries came through the baby monitor. The sound pulled them back from the abstract to the immediate. Their daughter needed them, regardless of what was happening in the world outside their home. As Jasmine rose to check on Zara, Terrell caught her hand. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Not just as a couple, but as agents of change. What happened on that flight was terrible, but if it leads to real transformation, at Skyline, in healthcare, in how our society addresses these issues, then maybe some good can come from it. Jasmine squeezed his hand in response. That's what I'm holding on to, she said. The hope that Zara will board a flight 20 years from now and have a completely different experience than I did. That's worth fighting for. As she went to comfort their daughter, Terrell remained in the living room, contemplating the path forward. The incident had revealed uncomfortable truths not just about his company but about himself, how despite his success and influence, he had still assumed some degree of protection from the most blatant forms of racism. That illusion had been shattered along with his wife's sense of security. The work ahead would be challenging, extending far beyond a single incident or employee. But as the cries on the baby monitor subsided, replaced by Jasmine's soothing voice singing a lullaby, Terrell found renewed resolve. The world his daughter would inherit might not be perfect, but it would be better, because they would make it so, one difficult conversation, one policy change, one moment of accountability at a time. 6 months later, a crisp autumn breeze rustled through the trees lining the university campus where Jasmine Washington stood at a podium, addressing the National Transportation Equity Conference. The audience before her represented a cross-section of the aviation industry, government regulators, civil rights organizations, and academic researchers. What began as a routine flight with my infant daughter became something none of us could have anticipated, Jasmine said, her voice clear and confident. But looking back now, I recognize that moment for what it truly was, not an anomaly, but a visible manifestation of invisible patterns that affect countless travelers every day. In the 6 months since the incident, much had changed. The video of Bethany Adams slapping Jasmine had become a case study in corporate training programs across industries. Bethany's wrongful termination lawsuit had been dismissed by a judge who cited the overwhelming evidence of policy violation, though she continued to make appearances on certain media outlets portraying herself as a victim of cancel culture. More significantly, Skyline Airways had undergone a fundamental transformation under Terrell's leadership. The executive team had been restructured, with new leaders in customer service and human resources specifically selected for their backgrounds in inclusive business practices. A comprehensive bias audit had resulted in the termination of several managers who had systematically buried discrimination complaints, and the airline's transparent handling of these issues had been praised by industry watchdogs. Today, I'm proud to announce the launch of the Air Travel Inclusion Initiative, Jasmine continued, a collaborative effort between medical professionals, the aviation industry, and civil rights organizations to develop evidence-based training and accountability systems that address bias in air travel. In the audience, Terrell watched his wife with immense pride. Despite the trauma of the incident, or perhaps because of it, Jasmine had emerged as a powerful advocate for change. While maintaining her surgical practice, she had channeled her experience into creating lasting impact. The settlement with Skyline Airways, which Jasmine had insisted be structured primarily as funding for new initiatives rather than personal compensation, had provided the seed money for the program she was now introducing. Additional airlines had joined the effort, recognizing the business case for inclusive service alongside the moral imperative. This initiative isn't about punishing individuals, Jasmine emphasized. It's about creating systems where everyone can travel with dignity. It's about recognizing that true customer service cannot exist without equal treatment for all customers. After the presentation, Jasmine and Terrell greeted attendees at a small reception. Among them was Harold Fisher, the elderly professor who had spoken up during the flight. "Dr. Washington," Harold said warmly, shaking Jasmine's hand. "Your presentation was exceptional. As someone who has studied civil rights movements for decades, I'm particularly impressed by how you've transformed an individual incident into institutional change." "Professor Fisher," Jasmine smiled. "Your support that day meant more than you know. Having an ally in that moment made all the difference. I'm just grateful to see something positive emerging from such an ugly situation," Harold replied. "Too often these incidents flare up in the media and then fade away without creating lasting change. That's exactly what we're working to prevent," Terrell added, joining the conversation. "And I'm pleased to share that Professor Fisher has been instrumental in developing the historical context section of our new training materials." Their conversation was interrupted by a young flight attendant who approached somewhat hesitantly. "Dr. Washington. Mr. Grant. I'm Shanice Davis from United Airways. I just wanted to thank you both. Your advocacy has already changed things for crew members like me. Last month, I reported a colleague for making discriminatory comments about passengers, and instead of being told to let it go like in the past, management took immediate action. That wouldn't have happened 6 months ago. These moments of impact had become increasingly common in their lives. Strangers approaching to share how the publicity around the incident had created space for their own experiences to be acknowledged and addressed." Later that evening, Jasmine and Terrell celebrated Zara's first birthday with a small gathering at their home. The milestone felt particularly significant given the journey of the past 6 months. "Hard to believe it's been a year since she was born," Jasmine remarked as they watched Zara toddle unsteadily around the living room, delighting their guests with her determined exploration. "And 6 months since everything changed," Terrell added quietly. The incident had indeed changed them, both individually and as a couple. Jasmine had developed a new advocacy voice alongside her medical career, speaking with authority on the healthcare implications of discrimination-related stress. Terrell had evolved as a leader, moving beyond policy to create genuine cultural transformation within his company. Their marriage had been tested by the public scrutiny and private trauma, but ultimately strengthened. They had learned to navigate new challenges together, the occasional hateful message that still found its way to them, the speaking requests that would have once seemed foreign to their professional identities, the delicate balance of maintaining privacy while serving as reluctant symbols. Among their birthday guests was Carla Jenkins, the passenger who had supported Jasmine during the flight. She had become something of a grandmother figure to Zara and a valued friend to the couple. "You know what strikes me watching you two?" Carla observed as they sat on the patio after most guests had departed. "You've managed to turn poison into medicine. That's not easy to do." "We've had help," Jasmine acknowledged, smiling at both Carla and Terrell. "And motivation." She nodded toward Zara, who was now sleeping peacefully in her father's arms. The week following Zara's birthday brought another significant milestone. For the first time since the incident, the family would be flying together, this time on a Skyline Airways flight to visit Jasmine's mother in Atlanta. As they boarded the aircraft, there were no viral videos, no confrontations, no slaps, just the ordinary process of finding their seats and settling in for the journey. The lead flight attendant, a black woman named Tasha Reynolds, welcomed them warmly, treating them with the same professional courtesy extended to all passengers. "It feels strange," Jasmine admitted quietly to Terrell once they were seated. "Being back on a plane, but not having to brace for potential conflict." "This is how it always should have been," Terrell replied. "This is what we've been working toward, not special treatment, just equal dignity." The flight proceeded without incident. When Zara became fussy during takeoff, Tasha promptly brought warm water for her bottle without being asked. The small gesture, simple human kindness that should have been unremarkable, brought tears to Jasmine's eyes, a visceral reminder of how different their previous experience had been. 2 weeks later, Jasmine stood at another podium, this time as the keynote speaker at a transportation equity conference hosted by the Department of Transportation. The audience included airline executives, civil rights leaders, and government officials with the power to implement industry-wide changes. 6 months ago, I was slapped by a flight attendant while holding my infant daughter, Jasmine began, immediately capturing the room's attention with her directness. Today, I'm not here to revisit that moment, but to talk about what comes next. How do we transform isolated incidents into lasting change? How do we ensure that equality in transportation isn't just a slogan but a lived reality for every traveler? As she spoke, Terrell watched from the front row, Zara now peacefully sleeping in his arms. Beside him sat representatives from 5 major airlines who had joined Skyline's Inclusion Initiative, committing resources to industry-wide reform. The real measure of progress won't be policies or press releases, Jasmine continued. It will be the experiences of ordinary travelers who board planes without having to armor themselves against bias. It will be the child who grows up never knowing what it means to be treated as less than because of their appearance. That future is possible, but only if we acknowledge the reality of the present and commit to the difficult work of change. The applause that followed her speech was thunderous, but more meaningful were the conversations that continued long after the formal presentation ended. Industry leaders approaching with specific questions about implementation, regulators discussing accountability measures, advocates sharing strategies for sustaining momentum. That evening, as Jasmine and Terrell prepared for bed in their hotel room, Terrell's phone buzzed with a news alert. The Transportation Department had just announced new regulations requiring airlines to track and publicly report data on bias complaints, creating transparency and accountability where little had existed before. Would this have happened without what we went through? Jasmine wondered aloud, looking at the sleeping form of their daughter in the hotel crib. Maybe eventually, Terrell replied. But not as quickly, and maybe not as comprehensively. Sometimes it takes a shock to the system to create real change. Jasmine nodded thoughtfully. I never wanted to be the face of this issue. But if our experience helps create a world where Zara doesn't have to face the same battles we did, then perhaps it was worth it. Speaking of Zara, Terrell said with a gentle smile, we have her pediatrician appointment tomorrow morning. Should we fly home or drive? The question hung in the air for just a moment before Jasmine answered. Let's fly. It's time to reclaim that experience fully, to board a plane without fear or anxiety, just as a family on a journey together. As they drifted to sleep, both were aware that their journey was far from over. The work of transformation, whether personal, corporate, or societal, was never truly complete. There would be setbacks, resistance, and new challenges ahead. But something fundamental had shifted, not just in airline policies or public discourse, but in themselves. They had discovered a resilience and purpose that transcended their individual success. They had learned to transform pain into progress, not just for themselves but for countless others who would never know their names. And as the first light of dawn filtered through the hotel curtains, illuminating Zara's peaceful face, they found renewed determination to continue the work they had begun, creating a world where no parent would have to explain to their child why the color of their skin determined how they were treated, whether at 30,000 feet or on the ground below. What do you think about how Jasmine and Terrell transformed their painful experience into meaningful change? Have you ever witnessed discrimination and spoken up like Harold did, or stayed silent? Comment below with your thoughts on how we can all contribute to creating more inclusive spaces. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more powerful narratives about overcoming adversity. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the impact of everyday discrimination and how we can all be part of the solution. Thank you for listening, and remember, change begins with awareness but succeeds through action. This story powerfully illustrates how racism persists in everyday interactions, often hidden beneath a veneer of professionalism until it erupts into overt discrimination. Jasmine's experience reveals how microaggressions accumulate, creating a foundation for more explicit bias. The incident demonstrates that even successful Black professionals aren't immune to racial prejudice regardless of their status or achievements. We also see how institutions often prioritize protecting employees over addressing discrimination, allowing harmful behaviors to continue unchecked. Bethany's previous complaints being buried shows how systems fail when accountability is absent. The narrative highlights the importance of allies like Harold and Carla, who validate experiences of racism by speaking up rather than remaining silent witnesses. Their actions remind us that confronting discrimination isn't solely the responsibility of those experiencing it. Perhaps most importantly, the story shows how transformative change requires more than just removing bad actors like Bethany. Real progress demands examining underlying systems, implementing transparent accountability measures, and creating cultures where equality isn't just policy but practice. Through Jasmine and Terrell's journey, we learn that while individual incidents of racism can cause profound trauma, they can also become catalysts for meaningful change when addressed with courage, resilience, and a commitment to systemic transformation. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and remained silent, or found the courage to speak up like Harold did? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. What small actions do you think we can all take in our daily lives to create more inclusive spaces for everyone? If this story touched you, please hit that like button to help others find it too. The more people who understand these experiences, the closer we get to meaningful change. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that illuminate important social issues and celebrate resilience in the face of adversity. Consider sharing this video with someone who might benefit from seeing how discrimination affects real people, or with friends and family who want to be better allies but aren't sure how to start. Sometimes the most powerful conversations begin with a shared story. Thank you for taking the time to listen and reflect on Jasmine and Terrell's journey. Your engagement with these difficult topics matters more than you know. Remember that while systemic change takes time, each of us has the power to make a difference through our daily choices and actions. Together, we can create a world where stories like this become relics of the past rather than reflections of our present.